Hello and welcome to part two. Pascal is just as happy to be here as he was for part one. Oh dear. Anyway, this part is about treaties, and let's just get right to it. Here's the map of the United States that we discussed in part one, and here is what would soon be Washington State, way up here in the corner. As you know, since time immemorial, the native people lived here, following their traditions, being a land-based people, living within the earth, taking care of the earth so the earth would take care of them for thousands and thousands of years. And white people start to make their way from the east in the 1800s. Fur trappers hunting beaver and other animals to sell for fur. And then, as we discussed in part one, missionaries, people who were on a mission to get other folks to change their religion and convert to Christianity. They believed that as Christians, it was their job to get other people to become Christians too. So they start coming west too. So now we've got the mountain men and we've got the missionaries. And as we discussed last time, the more people of European descent who come here, the more diseases they bring. And these folks have not been exposed to these Western diseases before. And they start to die in huge numbers. So sad. So just as all these people are coming, their diseases are killing more and more of the native people. Very sad. Now what's going to happen next is that the immigrants are coming now. We've got the fur trappers figured out how to get there. The missionaries figured out how to get there, and these missionaries are inviting more and more folks to come out here and be farmers. And here they come. Whoa, here they come. There are a lot of them every year, more and more. And the more white people who are coming, the more people of European descent, the more that impacts these folks with the diseases that they do not have immunity to, having not been exposed to them for centuries. And still, they keep coming, they keep coming, they just keep coming, ready to go be farmers in the Washington Territory. And by the 1850s, there are so many immigrants there who've come from the eastern part of the United States that they need a governor. So President Franklin Pierce appoints Isaac Stevens as the governor of the Washington Territory. And this is where land-based values and Judeo-Christian values really come into the story. Let's take a look at how this plays out. First of all, let's talk about Governor Stevens. Washington Territory has been established, and Isaac Stevens is the governor. And he wanted Washington to become a state and to join the United States of America. He wanted that. A lot of people wanted that. That's why the president put him out there in the first place. Now, the problem is, Washington State can't just say, hey, we're a state now. There's a population requirement. You need a certain number of people living in a territory before they can make it part of the United States, before it can become a state. Now, sadly and predictably, when they say a certain number of people, that they really meant a certain number of white people from the East Coast. They needed a lot of them living there, and then they would feel justified in making it a state. So Stevens wanted to bring in more immigrants to meet the population requirement and become a state. He also wanted to bring the railroad to Washington. Remember, this is in the 1850s. The only way you could get there from the East Coast was in a horse-drawn covered wagon or on horseback. I suppose you could walk. You take a very long boat ride, but there weren't roads. There weren't cars. There was the Oregon Trail, which is what people were using to get out there. But the fastest mode of transportation across the land back then were trains, and he really was very determined to bring the railroad to Washington State, or to the Washington Territory, I should say. So Governor Stevens knew that there were already people living here, but because of the Judeo-Christian worldview, it was hard for him, or for anyone like him, to see these native people and their nations as equally valid. Land-based values were different. Land-based values, which the native nations lived by, put humans within the earth and among the creatures and the plants and the weather and all that stuff. They were part of the earth. Judeo-Christian values puts humans on top. So now that these two groups of people are living very close together, and you merge those two worldviews, they don't go together very nicely, because while you've still got the land-based values with the humans at the center and being equal with the earth, Judeo-Christian values puts humans at the top of everything, including the humans who are within the land-based values. So this is something I'm going to call colonist values, and let me explain how that plays out in the Washington Territory. Because this illustration right here is colonization at its core. The incoming colonists can't and won't see the indigenous people as equally humans in their own right. They see them as they see the plants and the animals and the mountains and the rivers and the rainstorms. The colonizer sees the indigenous person as just one more obstacle, as something to deal with, and not as an equal. As such, Governor Stevens and the founders of Washington State set out to move the native people out of the way so that they could remake the land according to their own values and join the United States. Their goal was to convince the native people to move, to leave where they were living and to move into other parts of the state called reservations, and to let the white people just have the rest. They wanted to get them to agree to that. So before we get into what happened next, let's now hear a land-based perspective on all of this. We've really been talking about it kind of from the Judeo-Christian values-based perspective, and how, what the white people wanted Washington to become a state. So what's the tribal perspective? I'm going to share just a small bit from the Tribal Perspectives video. I'm going to read it to you. I'm not going to show the video clip because it's hard to isolate just a small part. But this is Tribal Elder Vernon Finley explaining the Kootenai chief's response at the time. So this is a tribal elder in present day explaining kind of what happened. And these are his words. This is what he said. The idea of owning the land, that was a foreign concept. It was something that couldn't be grasped. From the Western perspective, owning land is everything. They assumed, well, if this tribe is camping here, in the fall they're camping somewhere else, in the winter they're camping somewhere else, they must not own this land. So we can claim it and say it's ours. Well, this idea of property and ownership was one of the largest misunderstandings among the two worldviews. The idea was strange to the Kootenai chief, so what he said was, okay, you can go ahead and say you own the land, but this earth has been here for thousands and thousands of generations. And in a few short years, you're not even going to exist. But if you want to say you own it, go ahead and say that you own it, as long as we can do what we do. You do what you want to do, we do what we want to do. And as long as those things are in agreement, and you stop killing us, then this can work. And we're going to come back to how that played out in the treaty, but I really wanted to share this perspective as we go forward with this part of history. So here's the outline of Washington State as it is now. So it's 1854 or thereabouts, and with these opposing worldviews, the land-based values and the Judeo-Christian values, the founders of Washington State began to approach the tribal leaders. And they tried to convince them to move away from their homelands and settle on reservations. I think you already know what a treaty is, but just to be clear, what we're talking about when we say treaty is an agreement between countries. So it would be an agreement between the United States and the various tribal nations. Everything you see here that's light green, that is the land that Governor Stevens wanted to acquire by treaty. That is the land that he wanted to sit down with the tribes and try to convince them to give the United States that land. These are the different reservations that they had to offer at the time. So Governor Stevens was asking people that, hey, can you just like move from here and here and here and here and here and here and here to here, which is very, very, very different, very far away from what they were used to, and just very, very different from what they were used to. That's where the reservations were. This is where some of the reservations still are. And this is a loose representation of what it is like today. The gray just represents Washington State, and the yellow represents reservations today in current times. I'm going to leave it there for now because I want to give the rest of the time to another story, another video. This is a tribal perspective of what it was like for the Nisqually tribe and for Chief Leschi when these treaties were happening. As you can probably guess, this was not a happy time. This was not going to go very well. What Governor Stevens was asking people to give up, they didn't want to give up. And Governor Stevens and his folks were not all that willing to compromise. So I want to turn it over to another tribal perspective. Scroll down and just hit play on the video. It's about 18 minutes long or thereabouts, so make sure that, if you want to take a break, get a snack, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, whatever, and then sit back down and watch it. It's a really good story. She tells it much better than I could, so I want you to hear it from her. And after that, we'll just have some multiple choice questions, and then that'll wrap up Washington State history for the week. Go check out that video.